Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, money and politics reporter, Kyle Khan-Mullins. Kyle, thanks so much for joining me.
Always great to be here, Brittany. Thanks for having me.
You have some reporting on the vice president's net worth, but before that, we know he really rose to fame by penning his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, and he's come a long way since then. I mean, his fortune that Forbes is estimating really lays in stark contrast to his humble beginnings. I want to talk about his net worth, and it's even more so than it was when you and I had this conversation last year. But to start off the conversation, I want to talk about just who exactly JD Vance is. Talk to us first about his upbringing.
Yeah, we might know more about JD Vance's upbringing than almost any other politician because he rose to the national stage on the story of his upbringing. He was raised in Middletown, Ohio, by a family who had only just moved from Appalachia, that generation. And his early life was marked by this chronic instability that he writes about in Hillbilly Elegy. His mom cycled through different father figures. There was drug abuse in the house. He saw plenty of violence, other poor decisions in the community and his family. Eventually, he was taken in by his grandmother, who kind of forced him to get his act together, get his grades up, that kind of thing. So he graduated high school in pretty good shape. He could have gone to college, but instead he chose to join the Marines. And he says that taught him how to be an adult. They taught him how to balance a checkbook, how to invest, that kind of thing. Then he, after the Marines, he served a couple years there. Then he went to the Ohio State University, got his degree in less than 2 years. He writes in the book about how he just wanted to get through the education as fast as possible, get it done with, take out as few loans as possible to get that done. And that set him up to join the American elite. He then shipped off to law school, Yale Law School, in 2010. That is the top law school in the country. It's where he met his future wife, Usha Vance. And he set himself up to, like I said, join the American elite class.
And a lot of people really see Hillbilly Elegy as the embodiment of the American dream, coming from humble beginnings and then making this great life for yourself. And I mean, Hillbilly Elegy was widely acclaimed. It eventually became a movie. So talk to us about the book and what his career moves were after that.
Yeah, it was already being drafted when he was at Yale, but it came out as a full-fledged memoir in 2016, and J.D. Vance's timing could not have been better at that point. Liberals across America were looking for an explanation of why this Donald Trump guy was gaining so much traction in the heartland with Republicans. He'd just taken over this party that 4 years before had nominated Mitt Romney, a very different type of figure, right? And so JD Vance kind of became this anti-Trump, but still conservative guy who was able to explain some of Trump's appeal to the white working class to these coastal elites that he had since joined, in going to Yale Law School and marrying into a cosmopolitan family, et cetera, et cetera. So Hillbilly Elegy sold millions of copies, reportedly upwards of 3 million copies as of this year. But I will say, even while doing so, even as he was, explaining this rise of Donald Trump, he and Usha were bouncing between elite jobs. They started in D.C. Usha actually clerked for then Circuit Court Judge Brett Kavanaugh, later became a justice on the Supreme Court. Then they moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. Usha stayed in law, but JD pivoted to venture capital. He initially joined a VC firm founded by PayPal billionaire Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is going to come up later in our story as well. And then after Trump won, JD Vance wrote this big New York Times op-ed about this, and he wrote about how he was moving back to Ohio, and he started a nonprofit. It kind of flopped, unfortunately, so he went back to VC. And that's where his entry into politics starts to get more explicit.
And it's really interesting that he was this anti-Trump Republican. I mean, when he first was tapped to become Trump's running mate, those comments resurfaced again. But now he is fully behind President Trump, obviously, as his number two in the White House. But talk to us how he eventually did foray into politics.
Yeah, his venture capital work did start to drag him into politics a little bit more. He joined another billionaire founding firm, Steve Case's firm. It aimed to invest outside the big hubs, so outside of places like New York, DC, San Francisco. They were looking for companies that were based anywhere else, essentially. And then he ended up starting his own firm called Narya, backed in part by that same Peter Thiel, billionaire from before. And that was that company was really focused on conservative alternatives to mainstream companies. A good example is the video platform Rumble, which is trying to compete with YouTube, which is obviously dominant in the online video space. And Rumble is definitely orients itself as a more conservative outlet, more friendly to conservative voices. But that wasn't enough to scratch that political itch for JD. And in 2021, he announced a Senate run in Ohio as a pro-Trump conservative. A total populist. And he kind of remade himself as a new young messenger for MAGA. He won, and then he was selected as vice president for Donald Trump less than 2 years later and became the vice president. So he's in his early 40s, and he is the vice president of the United States.
And so then once he was tapped a short while later, you and I actually had a conversation on his finances. Obviously, we are Forbes. You're a money and politics reporter, so you're always looking at the money component, really, of any political figure. And at the time, Forbes estimated that JD Vance last year was worth $10 million. A year later, as you and I sit here now, what's Forbes estimating he's worth?
So our estimate as of 2025 is that he's up to about $12 million. And that's a result of some newly declared assets that we have on the more recent disclosures. He certainly got a raise when he went from the Senate to the vice presidency. And then he's had the solid stock market performance in recent years has helped boost him as well.
So let's break that down. There's 3 different buckets here. So let's talk about those updated financial disclosures. What did you learn from them? What changed?
Yeah, so the most recent disclosure that was available when we were working on his last net worth estimate, that was in 2024. The most recent disclosure was from the end of 2022, before he even became a senator. Since then, we had an additional Senate disclosure, and then he filed a disclosure as a candidate for vice president, and one just recently as vice president. And so that reflects his finances as of the end of 2024. So this gives us a much more up-to-date view of his fortune. And we see that some of those assets shifted into went up a little bit since then.
And what are some of his assets now, and how have they changed within the last year? Because as we know, he jumped houses, there's other changes. What do they look like?
Absolutely. So he still owns a big home in Cincinnati, Ohio, and a rental home in Washington, D.C. He did move into the vice presidential mansion, he and Usha and their family, and they sold their Alexandria, Virginia home earlier this year in order to move into the vice presidential mansion. So he's not paying for housing right now. That's certainly super helpful. But the biggest changes come from these new assets that we didn't really know or we didn't really have a value for before. First is related to that Naria venture capital firm. He sold his managerial stake in the company. And the 2022 disclosure, he still owned it, and it said that it had no value, but it was throwing off lots of income. Now, clearly, it did actually have some value because he ended up selling it in 2023 for between $1 and $5 million. We actually now know, as of his most recent disclosure, he didn't actually get that money in cash. He got a promissory note from his former company, Naria, and that note's due by 2028. But that's still money owed to him, again, worth between $1 and $5 million. So we're pretty sure, so we can count that as an asset toward his net worth. It's in essence a loan. And then the second piece, I'll say just really quickly, there's also 2 new pieces of real estate that we didn't know about before that he inadvertently left off previous disclosures, he says, but that we now know about. They're not huge. They're both worth between $50,000 and $100,000 according to the disclosure. One appears to be land around a cemetery that he bought to protect his grandmother's grave. This is in Kentucky. And then the other is a residence in Middletown, Ohio, where he grew up.
And in this third bucket, when we're looking at the changes to Vice President JD Vance's net worth, the stock market has also been a huge factor here. It's been very favorable to his fortune. Tell us about those moves.
Absolutely. The stock market was on a tear in 2023 and 2024, and that does show up in Vance's disclosures. He's pretty heavily invested in SPY. That's an index fund that tracks the S&P 500. And he's also pretty heavily invested in QQQ, which is a pretty well-known tech-heavy ETF. Those are up 53% and 95% respectively between the end of 2022 and the end of 2024. So we know that those stakes that he declared in 2022 that we have based his previous disclosure on have since increased in value by quite a bit.
Kyle, just the other week, I was speaking with a pollster, and we were talking about JD Vance as a politician. And based on polling, he is far and away the heir apparent to Donald Trump. He is the person who is most likely going to be the GOP presidential nominee. Based on polling, no one is even coming close to him in the Republican field. But based on what you're seeing, based on your reporting, do you have any indication of how bright his financial future looks like for the next 3.5 years of his presidency and beyond?
Absolutely. I mean, even if he just quit all politics today, he has $12 million. He is going to be just fine for the rest of his life. He's going to do just fine. Assuming he keeps that invested, he'll be doing okay. But his financial future is bright. So just to look at that, those couple of years as vice president, his pension is going to keep getting more valuable. It has a very low base right now because he doesn't have that many years in government service. But as he adds more years in government service at that high salary level that the vice president gets paid, that $235,000 a year, that pension is going to get more valuable. Now, for someone worth $12 million, that pension's probably not going to matter all that much to him, although it certainly won't hurt in retirement. But like you said, he might be the next GOP nominee. Whether he becomes president or not, his finances are going to be in really good shape because whether he, loses the 2028, say he becomes the GOP nominee, right? And say he loses the 2028 election, he can go do what former vice presidents do. Or if he wins the 2028 election, serves 1 or 2 terms as president, and then leaves office, he can do what former presidents do. It's all the same stuff. They all write books. They take lucrative consulting gigs. They sign lucrative media deals. They give very high dollar, very big speeches. Look at the Obamas, look at the Clintons, look at the Bushes. All of these folks have done very, very well for themselves post-presidency, not to mention Donald Trump, of course, the master of making money off of politics. So if JD Vance, whether he manages to become president or not, all of those rewards will be there for the taking for him.
Well, Kyle, per usual, I appreciate your reporting. I appreciate the updates here from our conversation last year. Thank you so much for coming on.
Always great to be here, Brittany. Thanks for having me.